There is something about the Cape Winden lighthouse, something no one has spoken of for a very long time, something that only appears when dusk sinks low over the water and the sea forgets to move for a little while. Sometimes, as fishermen glide home through the quiet evening currents, the light turns in a way that feels older than the tower itself, slow, steady, as if it remembers a time no one alive can recall. And people occasionally wonder, softly, almost in passing, why its glow remains so patient through nights like these, why each rotation feels as though it is waiting for something unnamed to return, drifting through the fog like a memory half rested. Near the fourth stone step inside the tower, there is said to be a faint line of salt, untouched by any storm. On the second floor railing, a nearly invisible scratch stays clear each time the mist thickens, and by the northern window frame, a pale sheet of old paper rests beneath a small stone, quiet, unchanged, as if time has forgotten to carry it away. Tonight, let these small, faded things unfold on their own, slowly, gently, like a breath moving through an empty room, and from that silent distance between sea and shore, let the story of the lighthouse keeper begin to drift open. Some say the lighthouse remembers every keeper it has ever sheltered, even long after they've fallen gone. Welcome to Paranoia Night's Tales. Take a slow breath and let the night settle around you. As the last curl of daylight slips behind the horizon, let your mind loosen just a little, allowing the quiet to come forward without effort. You don't have to focus on anything in particular right now. Just notice how your breath falls into its own rhythm, soft, unhurried, as though the night itself were breathing with you. Each time the air moves in, there is a gentle widening, and each time it drifts out, the world becomes a shade dimmer, calmer, older. Nothing asks for your attention. Nothing presses forward. The sea around Cape Winden holds its own ancient stillness, and as you listen, you might sense the way the water carries echoes that never rise above a whisper. You are not inside the lighthouse. You are not part of its story. You are simply near it, a quiet observer drifting alongside the night. And as the mind softens, it becomes easier to follow the movement of the light, its slow rotation, its gentle hum, each arc smoothing the edges of your thoughts until everything finds its place in the hush. When you feel the air growing cooler, imagine the faint touch of sea mist brushing your skin, not cold, not sharp, just a thin veil that settles without weight. This is how the night invites you in, not by calling, but by opening space. And you can let yourself drift into that space as naturally as a tide returning to shore. Somewhere to your right, the oar of your small fishing boat dips into the water with a sound so soft it barely exists. The sea glows faintly, an aftertaste of the day. And ahead, the lighthouse stands as a tall, unmoving silhouette carved against the fading sky. You do not steer toward it. You do not approach. You only pass by at the distance you've known all your life, far enough to remain untouched, close enough to sense its presence. The light turns once, a pale circle sweeping over the waves, catching your boat for a single quiet moment before drifting on. And in that brief touch of brightness, you glimpse the suggestion of movement inside the tower. Nothing sharp, nothing alarming, only the faint outline of someone tending to the old mechanisms with the patience of many seasons. As your boat drifts further, the scene begins to open, not fully, not clearly, but softly, as though the tower allows only fragments to be seen. And from those fragments, the life of the keeper begins to take shape. The shoreline beneath Cape Winden is a scatter of dark stones, worn smooth by generations of waves. When the tide is low, thin cracks fill with threads of pale water, reflecting whatever light the tower chooses to offer. Tonight, the reflections tremble just enough to seem alive. As you drift past, the air carries the scent of old salt, thick, grounded, familiar. It gathers where the sea meets the rocks, clinging to the edges of every surface. Above, the lighthouse rises like a quiet monument to forgotten weather. Its stones, layered from eras long before anyone remembers, hold a kind of patient weight, the weight of seasons passing without urgency. From your distant vantage, you can almost feel the pace of the place, slow, deliberate, without edges. And somewhere inside that tall, dim tower, the keeper moves with the same rhythm, a rhythm shaped by years of tending the great turning lens. The stones along Cape Winden shore keep their own slow history, each one a thumbprint of seasons folding into seasons. As you drift past, the boat's hull makes only the softest sound, a hush that seems to be swallowed by the wide dark. The air is full of small things, the salt that has settled into the seams of your coat, the faint metallic note from a distant bell, the hush of mist as it lays itself like a thin cloth over the water. The lighthouse ahead stands patient and unhurried, an old tower made of layered rock and long-worn mortar. Its skin remembers storms you do not, and the mortar between its stones keeps the memory of hands that have smoothed it across years. When the light sweeps across the sea, it does not demand that you look. It simply brushes the world with a pale line and moves on, as steady and unfussy as the tide. From where you float, 3 kilometers from shore, things resolve into gentle suggestions rather than details. A window glows and then does not. A shadow passes, not sharp enough to make out the shape, but enough to think of a hand pausing on a railing or the slow arc of an arm tending an unseen wheel. If you had been raised near these waters, you would know how to read such hints, the way a chimney breathes, the way a curtain hangs, when an old house keeps its own rhythms. You hold those small readings with you now, like a map made of impressions. Sometimes the keeper moves in patterns that feel almost like breathing. He does not hurry. There is no rush in the way his shoulders settle, in the practiced reach of his hand. There is comfort in the repetition, an entire life organized around the same slow chores, each one a small ritual with its own steady cadence. You sense it more than you see it, the careful rubbing of a lens, the gentle tightening of a bolt, the slow unwinding and retethering of a rope that has learned its places. The sea itself keeps a reserve of sound to be called on, little rhythms that return again and again. Tonight, there is a low, round hum under everything, a sound that could be the ocean finding its balance or the tower's gears settling into their motion. It is not loud. It is only present enough to give the night a backbone, a subtle measure you feel as much in your chest as in your ears. When your oar breaks the water, the sound seems suspended for a moment, absorbed into the stillness as if the whole world agreed to hold its breath with you. There are objects around the tower that keep their own quiet attention. A tin mug, dented along the lip, sits on a narrow window ledge, salt on its rim, a shadow inside where a day-old tea has cooled. A small notebook, the edges softened by damp seasons, rests under a stone to keep it from sailing away in sudden gusts. The pages have been turned so many times that the ink has learned to sink gently into the paper rather than sit proudly on the surface. These things are not important to anyone else, but to the person who passes them from hand to hand. They are markers of continuity, a slow conversation across the years. You might notice, if you look with the patience of one who has nowhere pressing to be, the way the light slows a fraction as it draws near the tower's north face, as if honoring some seam of memory held in the stone. There are moments when the sweep of the lens catches a thread of dust in a way that looks like a small comet, and you feel, briefly, that the world is larger and somehow older than the limit of your own day. That feeling is gentle. It does not unsettle you. It simply widens the air around your bones, creating a room in which small things can be noticed and allowed to be. The keeper's footsteps carry a softness that suggests the presence of wood that has been walked smooth. Imagine those steps, even if the distance makes them just another minimal motion in a long silhouette. Each footfall is measured, the kind of movement that comes from someone who has learned how to place weight without startling the world. When he pauses, the silence that fills the pause is not empty. It is the kind of silence that holds stories lightly, like sheets laid over furniture, protective, unassuming. Rain is a slow visitor here. When it arrives, it does not make a grand entrance, but comes in drifts, small and patient. The sea answers with a spreading metallic song, and the beams of the lighthouse thicken as the mist begins to sit heavier. During such nights, the tower seems to glow from within, its light made denser by the damp air, so that every sweep becomes a ribbon of comfort rather than a bright punctuation. You watch the ribbon cross the sea and feel something ease in your chest, a sense that all these motions are parts of a larger, older kindness. There are times when the keeper opens the small wooden door at the top of the spiral and leans his hand on the railing, looking at the curve of the world. He might be thinking of the food waiting on the stove, or of a son who brings a rare letter, or simply of the way the gulls have flown that day. Whatever thoughts he carries, they are private and soft, meant to be kept rather than shared. You do not intrude, you only witness the edges of these moments, and that is enough to feel tethered to the human thread of the place. The rituals that mark his evenings are small but exacting. He checks the lens, wiping with a cloth that moves in a practiced arc, watching the way light refracts and taking note of the tiny wake it leaves on the glass. He adjusts the timing of the rotation by a fraction. He feels more than measures. A motion that could be called instinct if the old ways were not also a learned tenderness. The oil is handled gently, poured in through a small funnel with movements that speak of careful preservation rather than waste. Each act is part of a speech with the tower itself, a language without words that says simply, "I am here." Meals are not ostentation. They are sustenance and ceremony stitched together. He tends a pot in the same slow manner he tends the lens, stirring until the ingredients yield a flavor that holds warmth but does not demand attention. The sound of the spoon on tin, the steam that curls like a small ghost from the pot, and the soft tearing of bread. These are the domestic hymns of a life chosen for quiet. Even hunger is dressed into a practice. He eats with an awareness that makes every bite an offering to the steady night. On certain evenings, as fog draws close, the tower keeps a watch on memories. Notes left by keepers of earlier years are read and set down with a reverence that seems to smooth the ink into a calmer hue. Some entries are practical, the measure of the tide on a certain date, the description of a gull's odd behavior, the marking of a repair. Others are quieter, snippets of observation that read like a half-remembered lullaby. These scraps are not puzzles to be solved. They are gentle echoes of lives that have lent themselves to the same small work. Reading them, the current keeper knows he is part of a slim chain of continuance, and that knowledge settles like warm cloth over the shoulders. As you glide on, the world half hushed and silvered, the idea of time becomes softer. Hours do not press like weights, they unfurl like ribbons. The thought of the keeper moving through some of these same hours, unchanged in their essential form for decades, wraps around that softness. You feel a kinship with the rhythm, whether you have shared it for a lifetime or are encountering it for the first time tonight. There is comfort in routines that do not demand applause, in tasks performed because they answer a quiet need. At some point, the silhouette of a hand against a window catches the light, and you understand that the life inside the tower is not empty. There is a person there who follows the same arc of small concerns and small joys. Perhaps he hums an old tune as he works, or pauses to listen to the rain. You do not have to know his name to feel the steadiness of his existence. Names become less important compared to the knowledge that someone is keeping something bright for the rest of the world to find when it needs directions in the dark. If the rain thickens and the wind reaches into the small slits of the tower stones, the interior becomes a cocoon of care. Nets are drawn in and placed to dry. A kettle warms over a modest flame. The keeper uses an old key to wind a mechanism, and you watch the light revolve because it must. It turns and turns, each sweep a quiet promise that the world can be guided back to itself through small, regular motion. There is a slow trust in those rotations, an implicit confidence that steadiness will outlast unrest. Your boat continues its path, keeping its respectful distance. And in that small motion, there is a sense of being part witness and part memory. You carry away impressions, not explanations. The feeling of salt on your lips, the soft cadence of the keeper's steps, the way a light can make a long night feel like a well-made garment. These fragments knit under the skin, and as they do, they shape the way the evening lays itself over you. There is no dramatic reveal here. There is simply the steady illumination of small truths. The lighthouse does not shout its stories. It offers them like a quiet torch passed from one hand to another. In the hush between the sweeps of light, you sense a long conversation continuing, between keepers and stones, between sea and lens, a conversation that asks nothing in return but presence. And as you float a little farther, the image of that presence remains, a shape moving slowly within the tower, hands considered and sure, a life aligned to the motion of a light. The details drift at the periphery of knowing, a gesture, a cup set down, a page turned with care. These are not mysteries to be solved. They are gentle invitations to stay nearby, to allow the night's broad arms to fold you in. Let this be the place where your attention softens. There is no need to pin meaning to the small things you have seen. They are reminders of a world that keeps its own counsel, and in doing so, makes a room for rest. Hold them gently for now, and when you are ready, let the slow, steady sweep of the Cape wind and light carry you further into the quiet. The shoreline becomes a dim thread behind you as the boat glides farther along its quiet arc. The lighthouse remains the one constant shape in the deepening dusk, a patient tower that seems to drift neither closer nor farther, as though the world moves around it instead of the other way around. The sea thickens with shadow, and the mist gathers in slow folds, curling at the edges of your vision like breath on cool glass. Somewhere behind those weathered stones, the keeper continues his gentle tasks. You can imagine the way his hand fits the curve of the wooden rail as he ascends the narrow spiral, each step echoing faintly, more a suggestion than a sound, from within the tower's core. The rhythm is steady, the kind born from decades of repetition, from years of understanding the heartbeat of the place more intimately than his own. Inside, a single lantern casts a dim, warm oval of light over the walls, revealing the soft patches where the stone has been polished smooth by passing hands. The keeper's shadow stretches long across the floorboards, moving in a slow dance as he leans over the table where his tools rest. A cloth worn thin by salt water, a small tin box of spare wicks, a brass key whose teeth have dulled under time's quiet insistence. He touches each object the way one might greet an old friend, without haste, without expectation, simply acknowledging the presence of something that has endured beside him. His fingers search for imperfections in the lamp housing, the way a musician listens for the faintest drift in tone. When he breathes, the breath is deeper than the room, filling the space in a manner that settles the lingering tension from the day. The kettle on the small cast-iron stove begins its soft murmur, a subdued warmth rising as steam curls into the air. He does not turn to look at it. He knows its voice well, the way it calls just before it sings. He lets it speak in that half-whisper, listening to the way the sound mingles with the distant hush of waves brushing the outer rocks. When he finally lifts the kettle, the metal handle clicks lightly, a sound gentle enough to be mistaken for part of the night. He pours the hot water over a handful of dried leaves kept in a small ivory-colored tin. The steam rises in tiny spirals, trailing along his sleeve before vanishing. The scent fills the room subtly, nothing bright, nothing sharp, just a quiet fragrance of earth and memory, curling around him in a way that feels like a blanket placed over shoulders that have carried many seasons. There is a wooden stool pulled close to the window, its legs uneven where age has worn them differently. The keeper sits with the weariness that belongs not to exhaustion, but to ritual, a kind of surrender that happens when the body knows exactly what comes next. He rests the cup between his palms and watches the slow unfold of the night through the old pane of glass. The world out there is blurred by mist, but he does not need clarity. He only needs the suggestion of waves and sky. The beam turns again, casting a gentle shimmer across his face. It paints his features in pale gold for only a moment before shifting away. He does not blink. He knows every interval, every pause, every rotation the light makes. It is the slow clock by which he measures not hours, but seasons, not time passing, but time continuing. A faint creak from the upper platform brings his attention to the ceiling, not alarmed, only listening. The tower often speaks to him this way, offering a soft complaint or a gentle sigh when the wind nudges its stones just so. He knows the difference between a settling board and a shifting beam, between the whisper of sand caught in a corner and the hum of the rotating lens. Tonight, the sound is familiar, an old note, the kind the tower uses when it exhales after a long day of light keeping. He finishes his tea in slow sips, each one warming a path that steadies his breath. When the cup is empty, he sets it down without the slightest clink, letting it rest on a folded cloth as though placing a fragile memory rather than a simple object. The shadows deepen around him as the lantern's flame steadies, and he stands to continue the next quiet task the night has shaped for him. In the corner rests a small wooden chest, its hinges dulled with a patina that speaks of half a century of fog. Inside lies a collection of notebooks, each bound with twine that has absorbed the scent of salt, each filled with the handwritten traces of keepers who stood watch long before him. He lifts the most recent one, the cover soft with wear, and opens it to a page marked by the corner of a dried leaf. The words waiting there are written in a hand, both steady and weathered. Light maintained at dusk, sea calm, fog drifting in from the west. If the wind shifts by morning, the gulls will circle early. He reads the entry without judgment or search for meaning. It is simply a quiet continuity, a moment where past and present meet in the small motion of turning a page. The next entry is older, perhaps his own handwriting from a season he no longer recalls in detail, and he reads it with the same soft patience. Beyond the tower's walls, the waves brush against stone with the same rhythm they used long before any keeper stood here. The world seems to lean into this constancy, resting its weight on the beam of light as though trusting it to remain. And inside, the keeper prepares himself to tend the lamp again, his steps gathering the quiet resolve of someone who has learned to mirror the sea's slow heart. The night deepens, and the tower continues its gentle conversation with the darkness, steady, unbroken, and full of a kind of enduring warmth that asks for nothing but presence. The room around him gathers a gentle hush as the lantern burns low, its flame moving with the quiet confidence of something that has survived many winds. He closes the notebook with a slow, deliberate motion, letting the cover meet the pages without a sound. The twine that holds the older journals together shifts slightly when he returns the book to the chest, as though remembering every hand that has touched it. The air inside the tower is warm in pockets and cool in others, a patchwork shaped by drafts that carry the scent of seaweed, salt, and the faint mineral breath of stone. The keeper senses these small differences without looking. He has learned the texture of the tower, the way someone learns an old friend's voice. When he moves, the boards underfoot respond with soft murmurs, the kind that belong only to well-aged wood that has absorbed decades of patient footsteps. Outside, the wind changes direction by a thin margin. You can tell by the way the mist folds differently along the curve of the rocks, drawing long, pale ribbons that slip and fade as soon as the beam of the lighthouse begins another rotation. The sea adjusts to the shift with a new rhythm, a deeper resonance that spreads like a low, distant hum across the water. It is not a warning, only a reminder that the ocean has a language older than any written record. Inside the tower, the keeper takes a careful breath and lifts the lantern from its hook. The light it casts is dim, not meant for searching, but for companionship. It forms a warm circle around him, softening the edges of shadows that cling to the corners. He steps into the stairwell, where the air grows cooler and the spiral ahead descends in a long, gentle curve. The lantern light brushes the stone in passing, leaving brief impressions of brightness that fade before they can fully form. He starts downward, one measured step after another. Each step carries a faint ring, an ancient metallic sigh, echoing lightly up the spine of the tower. The sound is not lonely. It is the tower's way of acknowledging movement, of reminding itself that someone is still here to witness the night. That echo rolls along the curve of the stairwell and returns to him softer, as though it were breathing with him. Halfway down, he pauses, not to rest, he rarely needs to, but simply because the tower asks for a moment of listening. He tilts his head slightly, letting the quiet settle. Through the stone, the low pulse of the sea reaches him, a steady thrum that is almost indistinguishable from the tower's own internal rhythm. It is a blend of ocean and architecture, two old presences conversing in tones too deep for language. He continues, descending into the part of the tower where the air grows heavier with the scent of damp rope and aged timber. Coils of thick line rest on wooden racks, their fibers stiff with salt. A small brass hook holds a jacket worn smooth along the seams, its fabric darkened by time and weather. The jacket sways imperceptibly when he passes, as if greeting him through memory rather than motion. He moves toward the workbench near the base of the tower. The tools are arranged with a careful symmetry: a small hammer, a rust-softened screwdriver, a cloth darkened with oil, a pair of gloves folded with quiet intention. These are not tools of repair alone. They are part of a ritual, a way of steadying the mind through familiar forms. He runs a fingertip along the handle of the hammer, tracing the grain of the wood as though reading a story written in its pattern. A faint drip of water echoes from somewhere in the lower stone, slow and deliberate. It is not a leak, simply the tower breathing out the condensation gathered through the long fog of the evening. The keeper listens, then nods once, acknowledgement, not concern. He has known this sound for years. It is one of the tower's softer habits. He reaches for the cloth and begins polishing a piece of brass fitted onto one of the inner rails. The motion is small, repetitive, almost meditative. The cloth moves in quiet arcs, smoothing away a thin film of salt that has gathered through the day. Each pass reveals a warmer glow beneath, a gentle shine that catches the lantern light in small, golden fragments. This is a task he performs not because it is essential, but because it keeps his hands in dialogue with the tower, reminding both of their shared work. Outside, the beam of the lighthouse continues its wide, unhurried sweep. Each rotation brushes the sea in a silent affirmation, touching the water just long enough to say, "I am here." The light reaches your boat again, gliding across the surface as though inviting you to drift a little longer. to let the night hold you without asking for anything in return. Inside the tower, the keeper finally sets the cloth aside. He wipes his hands on his trousers, not out of necessity, but out of habit, and lifts the lantern once more. The flame trembles as he moves, sending gentle flickers across the walls that paint transient shapes, here and gone, like faint memories rising and falling with each breath. He turns toward the narrow door that leads to the outer walkway. The metal latch gives a soft, aged click when pressed, a sound shaped by countless nights and countless fingers. The moment the door opens, the wind drifts in, cool and damp, settling over his shoulders like a shawl woven by the sea. He steps out onto the stone landing, where the world opens wide around him. The night air is deep and clean. The mist wraps itself along the walkway in thin, shifting layers, moving with the gentlest of intentions. From here, the sea stretches out endlessly, dark, immense, and serene. The sound of the waves rises in slow patterns, brushing the rocks below with a rhythm that seems to echo the steady pulse of the lighthouse itself. He leans both hands onto the railing, the metal cool beneath his palms. For a moment, he simply stands there, letting the world breathe around him. The lighthouse continues its rotation overhead, the beam cutting a soft path through the mist, illuminating droplets in brief, delicate glints. Somewhere far out on the water, your boat rocks in the subtle swell, the light brushing over you once more. And from this distance, as the keeper stands watch, it feels as though the sea has folded the two of you into the same quiet chapter of the night. Two small presences held gently within the wide, patient dark. The wind folds itself around the tower in long, lazy strokes, brushing past the stones as if recognizing them by touch. The keeper stays at the railing a moment longer, the night pressing gently against his sleeves, the mist settling into the lines of his coat like silver thread. He lets his fingers rest on the cool metal, feeling the faint vibration carried from the great rotating lens overhead, a pulse so steady it could almost be mistaken for the rhythm of his own breath. Below, the sea sighs against the rocks, each wave rising with a patient curve before settling into foam. The sound blends with the quiet creak of the wooden walkway, a union of elements shaped by the same soft inevitability. He watches the water for a while, eyes tracing the slow movement of the tide, as though reading a story written in shifting shadows. Eventually, he lifts the lantern again. Its small circle of light glows warm against the mist, drawing a delicate halo that follows him as he turns back toward the door. The hinges offer a gentle groan when he closes it, sealing the walkway behind him with a softness that suggests long familiarity rather than resistance. Inside, the stairwell wraps around him once more, the air returning to stillness in seconds. His descent is unhurried, each step measured with the weight of someone who has walked this spiral more times than he can count. The lantern's glow casts thin ribs of light along the stones, creating fleeting impressions of movement in the grain of the walls. Sometimes, when the wind nudges the tower just slightly, the light flickers in a way that makes the shadows seem to breathe. He does not startle at this. He has lived within these shadows long enough to understand their quiet language. At the base of the stairwell, the door to the storage room waits slightly ajar, not from neglect, but from habit. He nudges it open with his shoulder, and the scent of rope fiber and cold metal greets him. The room contains what it has always contained: neatly coiled ropes, small crates with chalk markings softened by time, a jar of thick oil used for metal joints, and a shelf of folded cloths that carry the faint odor of sun and seawater from countless days of drying. He sets the lantern on a hook near the ceiling beam. Its light broadens, illuminating the room in soft amber. The space feels older here, as though each grain of dust holds the trace of hands that once worked with the same careful precision. He steps toward a tall cabinet and pulls open a door to retrieve a rain cape, its oil-skinned surface worn smooth in places from repeated use. Outside, a subtle shift in the air signals the approach of moisture. It is not yet rain, only the suggestion of it, the whisper that precedes a gentler wash of weather. He prepares for it the way he always does, calmly, without urgency, as part of the rhythm the sea offers him. He folds the cape over his arm and returns to the stairwell, ascending this time with the knowledge that night is settling into its longer hours. At the next landing, a small wooden table waits by the wall. On it rests a sea glass jar half filled with coarse salt, a candle the color of beeswax, and a bundle of herbs tied with thin twine. He pauses to touch the jar lightly, feeling the cool curve of the glass before moving on. There is a quiet comfort in these stations scattered throughout the tower, small anchors that guide his routines like stars guiding old currents. They do not carry great purpose, but they carry consistency, and in that consistency he finds a kind of companionship. At the mid-level window, he pauses again, drawn by the movement outside. The lighthouse beam arcs across the sea, illuminating the mist in a pale, brief ribbon. Through that shifting veil, he catches a faint silhouette, your boat drifting with the tide, steady and small against the wide dark. He watches it for a moment, not with concern, but with a recognition that belongs to those who share a landscape in silence. He does not know your name, nor the purpose of your late journey, but the sea often weaves strangers into the same evening without asking permission. The light passes again, and your silhouette softens into the fog, becoming another gentle impression in the night. He continues upward. The air grows warmer near the top, touched by the steady heat of the lamp mechanism. When he reaches the lantern room, the rotating lens stands in its quiet authority, a great glass heart turning with an unwavering heartbeat. He sets the rain cape aside and approaches the mechanism with a familiarity shaped by countless nights. The polished brass gleams faintly under the lantern light, its edges softened by age. He rests a hand on the metal, feeling the slow, even vibration of the machine. The tower hums around him, a low resonance that blends with the far-off breathing of the sea. He closes his eyes briefly, letting the rhythm settle into him. There is no urgency in his movements as he checks the mechanisms, adjusting a small gear, tightening a bolt no larger than a coin, wiping away a thin smudge of oil with the corner of his sleeve. These gestures are not about maintaining the light alone. They are a way of honoring the structure that shelters him, a continuation of the dialogue between keeper and tower. When he opens the small hatch to check the flame, the glow reflects softly across his features, casting warm highlights along the lines time has drawn there. The flame itself burns steadily, its heart a quiet gold, its edges trembling like a whispered promise. Satisfied, He closes the hatch gently and steps back, letting the great lens continue its rotation. The light leaves a slow ribbon across the sea, brushing the world with a calm, unwavering certainty. Below, the waves answer with their own steady rhythm. Above, the fog carries the glow in soft fragments, and within the tower, the keeper breathes in the night as though sharing it with an old, loyal friend. The lens completes another slow turn, casting its soft geometry across the mist before withdrawing again into its steady arc. The keeper stands still for a breath, watching how the light slides over the glass walls, bending and folding itself into subtle shapes. The tower seems to lean into the movement, as though the old stones were listening to the path the brightness takes each time it circles. He lets his hand rest on the metal rim of the mechanism, feeling the quiet warmth rising from within. It is the kind of warmth that has nothing to do with fire, but everything to do with continuity. The tower has kept this warmth through countless nights, through winds strong enough to rattle shutters, through fog thick enough to erase the horizon. Tonight, the warmth feels almost like a pulse, slow, calm, unwavering. He steps back and turns toward the narrow window in the lantern room. The glass is old, wavering slightly in its frame, and the view beyond it shifts like a memory. The mist drifts by in thin columns, carrying traces of salt and faraway rain. The sea below flickers faintly as the beam passes, its surface smoothing and darkening like polished obsidian. Somewhere beneath that darkness, currents curl around rock, running ancient paths that have shaped the coastline for generations. He watches the water for a while, seeing not the details but the movement, subtle contractions and releases, the slow rise as the tide breathes itself inward. The sound is distant yet present, a low murmur that spreads through the night like a gentle insistence. He has grown used to reading these motions the way a farmer reads clouds or a traveler reads roads. The sea speaks in patterns, and he knows them intimately. With a final glance, he lifts the lantern and turns toward the stairs again. The tower feels different when descending, quieter, as though the height above gathers the night in a way the lower levels cannot. Each step takes him into thicker pockets of shadow, where the lantern glow reaches only a little beyond his boots. The spiral bends the light in subtle ways, painting soft arcs along the stones and turning the dust motes into drifting, gold-touched specks. At one of the landings, he pauses, a moment so small it barely counts as stillness. There is a sound, faint and almost impossible, a soft tapping near the old wooden frame of the window, not sharp enough to be a knock, not irregular enough to be a warning. It is simply the night touching the tower in its own quiet language. The keeper tilts his head slightly, listening with the same patience he offers every sound the lighthouse makes. The tapping stops, the wind moves, the mist shifts, and the silence settles again like a blanket shaken gently over the room. He continues downward. On the next level, a shelf holds a small collection of objects gathered across his years here, each humble, each carrying a breath of memory. There is a smooth stone shaped like a teardrop, found on a morning when the tide had withdrawn farther than usual. A feather caught on the railing after a long migration season. A fragment of pottery washed ashore, its edges rounded by time and water. None of these things have value in the usual sense, but to him they are markers of the quiet relationships the sea forms with those who live near it. He picks up the stone and turns it in his palm. Its surface is cool and worn, as if carrying the imprint of all the waves that have touched it. He sets it back gently and moves on, the lantern light shifting across the shelf in a slow glide. Near the bottom of the stairwell, he reaches the wooden door that leads to his living quarters. The hinges release a soft groan when he pushes it open, the sound slipping into the room like a familiar voice. Inside, the modest space is warm and dim, lit only by a small oil lamp on the table. The air carries the scent of dried herbs, a trace of tea, and the subtle musk of old books. He closes the door behind him, letting the latch fall into place with a soft click. The walls here hold the wear of countless evenings spent in quiet tasks, mending nets, copying weather notes, carving small marks on driftwood just to keep his hands moving when the nights grew long. There is no clutter, only the gentle evidence of a life lived in slow companionship with solitude. He hangs the lantern on a hook by the door and moves toward the stove, where a kettle he prepared earlier sits waiting. He lifts the lid slightly. The warmth inside flows out in a soft exhale, carrying the faint aroma of mint and sea thyme. He nods to himself, sets the lid back, and rests one hand on the wood counter, letting the quiet of the room settle around him. He warms a thin broth on the small iron stove, the steam rising in a pale ribbon. The soup is little more than water, softened by herbs and a memory of salt. He breaks a single piece of bread, dry at the edges, softer near the center, and lets it sink into the warmth. He eats slowly, not out of hunger, but out of ritual, a quiet reminder that even the smallest meal can carry a kind of solace in the deep hours of night. By the table, a logbook lies open, the page untouched since dusk. The ink bottle waits beside it, the tip of the pen resting in its shallow groove. He sits slowly, the chair creaking in a familiar way, and positions the logbook under the lamp's golden glow. The flame bends slightly as he leans in. He dips the pen and begins to write, not quickly, not with urgency, but with the steady deliberation of someone recording the world as it is, not as it should be. His handwriting flows with the soft confidence of a practiced observer. Light steady, fog continues from the west, sea holding calm rhythm, no changes in the wind. He pauses, letting the pen hover above the page. A small silence forms, shaped by reflection rather than hesitation. Then he adds, "Visibility low, the water carries a quiet tonight." He lifts the pen again, watching a droplet of ink gather at the tip before settling into stillness. The lamplight glows on the wet strokes, making them shimmer faintly as they dry. Outside, the sea continues its unhurried breathing. The light above continues its patient sweep, and the keeper sits with these constants, shaping another entry in the long tapestry of nights recorded in this tower. The ink settles into the grain of the paper, darkening as it dries, until the words look as though they have always belonged there. The keeper closes the bottle gently and sets the pen aside, its metal tip catching a glint of lamplight before falling into shadow again. For a moment, he simply rests his hands on either side of the logbook, letting the quiet of the room breathe around him. The stove gives a soft click as the heat shifts within it, and a gentle warmth spreads through the small quarters. He leans back slightly, feeling the familiar comfort of the chair beneath him, a chair that has weathered countless nights, its joints softened by time, its back shaped imperceptibly by the weight of long contemplation. He rises slowly, letting the stillness guide his movements, and crosses the room to the wooden shelf where a simple ceramic cup waits. The cup is chipped near the rim, a small imperfection smoothed by years of use. He takes it in hand, feeling the faint residue of warmth from the stove nearby, and turns back to the kettle. Steam curls up as he lifts the lid again, and he pours the hot water with a steadiness that mirrors the rhythm of the tower outside. The tea darkens gradually, the leaves unfolding like small shadows swirling within the cup. He watches the motion just long enough to feel the night gather closer around him. Then he carries the cup to the table by the narrow window and sits. The glass in the window pane trembles slightly as the tower shifts in the wind, and the keeper wraps both hands around the cup to absorb its warmth. Outside, the fog softens what remains of the world, smoothing edges, turning the horizon into a single, seamless breath of gray. In the distance, far beyond the reach of the lantern light, the faint outline of your boat drifts as a shadow among shadows, guided more by the tide than by intention. He takes a slow sip of tea. The warmth spreads down his throat and settles behind his ribs, a quieting presence that loosens the day from his shoulders. He places the cup gently back onto the table and allows his gaze to wander across the room. Every object has its place, and every place holds a memory, subtle, unspoken, woven into the wood and stone like threads of an old tapestry. On a small hook near the window hangs a brass instrument once used for reading the stars. Its surface is darkened by the touch of salt and age, but its shape remains true. The keeper reaches for it sometimes, even though he no longer needs it the way the early keepers did. Tonight, he lifts it from the hook with the same soft reverence, feeling the cool metal settle into his palm. He turns it slowly, letting the grooves catch the lamplight. It is an object of the past, carried through years not because it is needed, but because it belongs. He thinks briefly of the hands that held it before his own, hands hardened by storms, thickened by rope, ink-stained from recording tides that shaped entire seasons. Setting it down carefully, he returns to the window. The light from above sweeps across the water again, its reflection gliding over waves that rise and fall with a gentleness rarely granted by the open sea. The beam feels almost like a breath, inhaling and exhaling through the mist, comforting in its repetition. The keeper watches that light as though it were an old companion. He has spent more nights with it than with any person still living. It keeps him company in ways that words cannot. Where a voice might demand an answer, the light asks nothing. Where a presence might interrupt a quiet moment, the light only fills it. He lifts the cup again, the warmth now mild, and takes another sip. His shoulders rise in a slow breath, then fall, settling into the deep rhythm that the night seems to encourage in all who join it. Outside, the fog thickens, brushing the tower in faint currents. The stones respond with small murmurs that only someone who has lived with them would notice. A faint creak comes from the wooden beam above, the kind of sound that might go unnoticed by anyone unfamiliar with the way a tower settles into each hour. The keeper tilts his head. listening. He recognizes the pitch of the creak, the subtle shift of weight in the structure. It is not a warning. It is simply the building adjusting to the changing temperature of the night, exhaling softly as the wind eases. He finishes the last of the tea, sets the cup aside, and stands. There are still tasks to be done, not urgent, not complicated, just necessary in the way a heartbeat is necessary. He gathers the empty cup, carries it to the small basin, and rinses it without haste. The water falls in a thin stream, soft enough to vanish beneath the sounds of the distant waves. When he places the cup upside down on the cloth to dry, his reflection flickers faintly in the window, a blurred outline softened by lamplight and mist. It is an image that carries a kind of quiet dignity, shaped by years of knowing what it means to keep the night steady for others. He steps toward the door that leads back to the stairwell. As he opens it, the tower greets him again with its gentle echoes and subtle drafts. The lantern upstairs continues its rotation, its hum drifting down like a lullaby carried through stone. He begins the ascent once more, moving as though time itself were a long, continuous breath. He moves upward with the same patience that the tower seems to expect of him, each step a quiet part of a routine shaped over years. The stairwell curves around him like the inside of a seashell, gathering sound and returning it softened, as though the stones themselves have learned how to cradle each footfall. The lantern he carries glows in a warm hush, casting light that never quite reaches the far edges of the spiral. As he ascends, the faint hum of the mechanism above grows clearer, a gentle vibration threaded through the stones. It is a familiar presence, steady, unwavering, older than his time here, and perhaps older than any living memory of the coast. The hum is not loud. It is the kind of sound that lives just beneath awareness, the way a heartbeat keeps time in the body without ever demanding notice. He reaches the mid-level landing and pauses, the lantern light brushing the walls in soft, irregular shapes. A small window here faces the open sea, its frame worn thin at the corners where salt has settled for decades. He steps closer, lifting the lantern just enough for the glass to catch the glow. Outside, the mist drifts in slow, trailing veils, folding and unfolding over the waves like long, pale fabric pulled by a hidden hand. Your boat appears again, a faint silhouette nestled among the shadows. It sways gently in the tide, its bow rising and falling as though breathing with the night. The keeper watches it without expression, but not without attention. There is a kind of mutual recognition in the quiet. Two solitary lives sharing the same stretch of darkness, each moving within their own tasks. He lowers the lantern and continues upward. The air warms subtly as he nears the lantern room, touched by the heat of the flame that keeps the great lens turning. When he enters the chamber, the polished glass around him glows in a broad, steady arc, each pane catching the flame at a slightly different angle. The light bends and widens, then compresses again, and he stands inside its movement as though inside the slow turning of time. He places the lantern on a shelf near the wall and approaches the central mechanism. It greets him with a soft metallic murmur, a sound shaped by wheels and gears that have been tended with careful hands. He sets his fingers lightly on the housing, feeling the warmth that radiates from its heart. This warmth has accompanied him through storms, fog, and countless nights of deep silence. It has remained constant even when the world beyond the mist shifted in ways that left no trace on the stones. His touch is gentle as he inspects the moving parts, an adjustment here, a tightening there, each motion unhurried. The tower does not require speed, it requires presence. The light continues its slow, even rotation, brushing the horizon with its pale sweep. Every time the beam reaches the window beside him, the chamber brightens for a breath, then softens again into amber shadow. Once his inspection is done, he moves to the narrow ledge encircling the lens. The floor here is smooth from years of passing steps, its boards shaped by countless nights of quiet vigilance. He looks out through the glass, watching the light arc across the water, illuminating the mist in shimmering fragments. The silence is deep but never empty. Beneath it lives the distant roar of waves striking the outer rocks, the faint clatter of shells rolling in the tide, the slow turning of the lens beside him. These layers of sound blend into one continuous lull, the kind that gently loosens the threads of thought. He places his palm against the cool glass. For a moment, he stands there with eyes half closed, letting the night breathe through the tower. Beyond the window, the mist thickens, swirling in soft, muted patterns. The sea glows faintly under the beam, and the horizon dissolves into a single gray-blue breath. After a time, he steps back. The lantern waits by the wall, its flame swaying in the light drafts that rise toward the top of the tower. He lifts it once more, its small warmth settling into his hand, and moves toward the stairs. The descent from this height feels different, more inward, more tender, as though the tower watches over him even as he leaves its highest room. He begins to walk down, each step guided by the arc of dim light that moves before him. The mist outside brushes against the windows in faint shifting patterns, almost like fingertips tracing old scars in the glass. The keeper does not look back. The tower has a way of telling him what it holds without requiring his gaze. As he reaches the lower levels, the hum of the mechanism fades into the background, replaced by the steady pulse of the sea pushing against the outer stones. The rhythm follows him down the stairwell, merging with the soft click of his boots, forming a quiet cadence that carries through the air like a lullaby built from ocean and stone. When he arrives once more at the door to his quarters, he pauses with his hand on the latch, listening to the night settle. Then he opens it, crossing the threshold with the ease of someone stepping into a room that has learned to shape itself around his presence. The lantern light greets the familiar shadows, and the night deepens further into calm. The room receives him the way a shoreline receives a returning tide, quietly, without surprise. The lantern he carries lifts the edges of the shadows just enough to reveal their familiar shapes. The small wooden table, the coat hung neatly by the door, the folded blanket resting near the foot of the bed. Everything feels softened by the night, as though even the furniture has settled into a gentle listening. He places the lantern on the table, and its glow widens across the room in a slow amber bloom. The flame flickers once before steadying, painting a thin line of light along the curved frame of the window. Beyond the glass, the fog ripples in silent waves, drifting past in soft, unhurried currents. The world outside feels far away, reshaped into something tender and formless. The keeper removes his coat and drapes it over the back of the chair. The fabric is damp at the sleeves, touched by mist from the upper walkway. He smooths the cloth with his hand, a gesture not of necessity, but of habit, a small ritual that gives shape to the quiet. His movements have the rhythm of someone who has long made peace with the slow turning of time. He steps toward the stove and kneels to adjust the fading embers. The faint crackle of wood shifting within the metal chamber breaks the stillness just enough to lend warmth to the air. The glow inside brightens for a moment, casting reddish shadows along the floorboards before settling again into a low heartbeat of heat. On a nearby shelf sits a small wooden box, worn smooth at the edges. He lifts it carefully and opens the lid. Inside lies a collection of simple objects: a seashell the color of bone, a piece of worn rope tied in a loose knot, a bit of driftwood carved into a tiny spiral. He takes up the driftwood and turns it slowly between his fingers. Its surface is soft and polished, shaped by both water and hand, holding within it the quiet story of storms survived and seasons endured. He sets the piece back in the box and closes the lid with a gentle press. The sound is soft, like the sigh of someone settling into rest. A faint vibration runs through the floor, the subtle transfer of motion from the rotating lens above. It is a constant presence, so familiar he scarcely notices it, yet comforting in its consistency. The tower is alive in its own way, breathing in long mechanical whispers. The keeper pauses, letting that subtle movement pass through him. It is an old reassurance, one he has known for so many years that its absence would feel like a missing heartbeat. He moves to the wash basin, pours a little water into a tin bowl, and dips his hands inside. The water is cool, almost cold, but refreshing. He runs his fingers through his hair, smoothing away flakes of salt that have settled there from the sea breeze. Droplets trail down his temples, catching the lantern light in brief silver lines before disappearing into the fabric of his shirt. After drying his hands, he crosses the room and lowers himself to sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress shifts with a soft rustle, releasing the faint scent of clean fabric warmed by the day's earlier sun. He leans forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze drifting toward the window, where the mist curls against the glass. The tower breathes slower now, as if the night has settled into its final rhythm. Your breath finds a lower place to rest, and every thought loosens, drifting further from the edges of your mind. Nothing rises, nothing holds. Everything gently sinks. The keeper closes his eyes for a moment, simply listening. The lighthouse continues its slow, measured breathing above him. The sea answers in long, rolling murmurs. Between the two, the night folds into itself, weaving both into a single, quiet presence. He opens his eyes again and reaches for the small journal resting beside the bed. This one is different from the tower's logbook. Its pages are never meant for record keeping. Instead, it contains fragments of thought, pieces of memory, the quiet reflections that surface only in hours like these. He flips to a blank page and rests the tip of the pen against it. The ink flows gently, forming words shaped not by urgency, but by the ease of someone writing for the sake of breathing. The fog rests soft tonight. The sea moves with a patient heart. The tower holds steady. He pauses, letting the words settle, then adds, "I am grateful for the quiet." The journal closes with a whisper of paper brushing against paper. He places it back on the table and rests his palm briefly on the cover, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. The lantern light dims slightly as the flame wavers, caught in a passing draft. The shadows shift once, then settle. The keeper stands again, slow and deliberate, and moves toward the door leading back to the stairwell. The night is not over. There are still rhythms to tend, small tasks that keep the tower breathing. His hand finds the latch, and as he draws in a soft breath, the old wood responds with the faintest creak. The air beyond the door waits, cool and gentle, ready to guide him through the next quiet moment. The door opens with a hush, and the cool air of the stairwell drifts in, brushing gently against his face. It carries the familiar blend of stone, salt, and the faint metallic warmth rising from the mechanism above. He steps through, letting the quiet fold around him once more. The lantern light follows, stretching his shadow along the curved wall like a soft, wavering silhouette. He descends slowly, each step sinking into the rhythm the tower provides. A calm pulse echoed through wood and stone. The warmth of his quarters fades behind him, replaced by the subtle chill that lives deeper inside the spiral. The tower always grows cooler the lower one travels, storing the breath of old storms in layers unseen. Tonight, the chill is gentle, like a memory rather than a warning. Halfway down, he notices the way the draft shifts, barely perceptible but present. The tower has many such whispers, small changes in air that come from openings no wider than a nail's edge. These whispers often guide him more than sight. He follows the faint pull of the draft, turning slightly to face a small landing where a wooden door sits slightly ajar. He nudges it open. Inside is a narrow storage room filled with the soft smell of aged fiber and sea-soaked wood. Coils of rope hang from pegs along the wall, their strands stiffened by salt but neatly arranged. Several wooden crates sit stacked at the far end, each marked with chalk numbers that have faded into pale ghost lines over the years. The keeper lifts one of the crates, the wood rough beneath his hands, and checks the contents: spare lantern wicks, a tin of oil, a set of replacement bolts wrapped carefully in cloth. He removes a small metal bracket, examining it with a practiced eye. There is no urgency, no worry, only the quiet discernment of someone accustomed to maintaining the tower's 1,000 small bones. He returns the bracket to its place and closes the crate gently, sliding it back into its nook with barely a sound. The lantern light glows against the ropes, making their fibers shimmer faintly like threads of pale gold. Dust motes drift through the beam as he turns, moving with the unhurried grace of something underwater. He steps back into the stairwell. The descent continues, his footsteps soft, the lantern brushing the walls in warm arcs. Near the bottom, the architecture shifts. The stones grow larger, darker, and each block carries the cool density of deep foundation. The tower's oldest breath lives here. The keeper feels it in the air, heavy, still, grounding. He reaches the final door. This one opens outward onto the lower landing that faces the sea. The moment he pushes it, a wave of cool mist flows around his ankles, curling upward like a living fabric. The night outside is deep, but not hostile. The fog sits low against the rocks, and the air has thickened into a soft haze that muffles even the nearest sounds. He steps out. The stone beneath him is damp, slick with the sheen of sea spray that drifts up from the shoreline below. He knows exactly where each uneven line of the stone lies, how each slab slopes, how the moss grows in thin, delicate threads along the edges. He has walked these stones in rain, in wind, in starlight, in the pale hush of winter dawn. The sea meets the rocks in slow, rounded strokes. The sound is steady, like a quiet drum softened by distance. A pale shimmer spreads along the surface whenever the lighthouse beam reaches this corner of the coast, casting the water into momentary relief. A silver breath, a fleeting line of brightness, then darkness again. He walks to the railing. From here, the world opens, a vast, gentle expanse of mist and sea, stitched together by nothing more than the rotating sweep of the lighthouse above. The air tastes like salt and fog and something faintly metallic, the scent of stone that has stood too long to be moved. The keeper places both hands on the railing and leans slightly forward. His breath escapes in a slow cloud, disappearing into the night. He listens to the sea's rhythm, to the small, patient movements of water pressing against rock. This is the part of the night he knows best, the moment when the world feels suspended, held in a silence so deep it becomes almost warm. He stays like this for a long while, letting his senses open one by one. A soft creak rises from the wood above, a signal that the lens has completed another turn. A whisper of wind catches the edge of his collar. A faint vibration moves through the stone beneath his boots. None of these ask for action. They only ask to be witnessed. Far out on the water, your boat drifts in a gentle arc. The outline is faint, barely more than a smudge of darkness against the mist. But it moves steadily, guided by the same tide that touches the rocks below. When the lighthouse beam sweeps across, the water around your boat glitters for the briefest moment, like a constellation reappearing after a long absence. The keeper watches, not with curiosity, but with a quiet sense of recognition, as though the night has chosen to introduce one solitude to another. He lowers his gaze to the water at his feet. Foam coils around the rocks in delicate spirals, forming shapes that dissolve before they can fully form. The sea is patient, unhurried, drawing back only to return again in the same softened rhythm. He closes his eyes. The tower hums behind him. The waves murmur below. The lantern in his hand flickers once, then steadies, and the night, vast and gentle, holds the world in a loosened embrace. The keeper remains at the railing until the night settles again into its slow, familiar rhythm. The fog presses closer, thickening in soft folds that blur the world into a single muted shape. It moves like breath, expanding, contracting, drifting across the surface of the sea with a gentleness that seems older than the lighthouse itself. He lifts the lantern slightly, letting its warm glow touch the stone beneath him. The light spreads in a calm arc, illuminating the moss that grows along the cracks, the faint shimmer of moisture gathered in small beads. Each droplet catches the glow for a brief second before sinking back into shadow. The keeper watches the way light interacts with darkness, never fighting it, simply resting within it, sharing space. He breathes in deeply. The air tastes of salt, mist, and a faint metallic hint carried from the rocks that have stood here through centuries of turning tides. The mist gathers on his eyelashes forming tiny droplets that vanish each time he blinks. Without hurry, he steps away from the railing and moves across the stone platform, each footstep soft, absorbed by the damp surface. The sound is barely there, more a texture than a noise, blending seamlessly with the low, drawn-out hush of the sea. The lantern light reveals the outline of a weathered wooden bench set against the wall of the tower. The keeper lowers himself onto it, placing the lantern beside him. The flame sways slightly in the breeze, its glow dancing across the stone and the fabric of his coat. He rests his elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely, letting the mist settle around him like a gentle shawl. From here, the lighthouse beam is visible not as a blinding arc, but as a softened bloom of light that expands and fades in slow repetition. The fog disperses it into fine particles, turning each sweep into something delicate, almost tender. The keeper watches this play of illumination, his eyes following the steady intervals that have shaped every night he has lived here. A soft sound rises from the rocks below, water sliding through narrow cracks, gathering, releasing. The rhythm shifts slightly as the tide eases outward, drawing a new pattern over the shore. He listens, not looking down, letting the sound paint its own quiet picture in his mind. A faint creak comes from the tower behind him. Another sigh from the lens above, a gentle thrum from deep within the stones. These noises form a kind of conversation, one he has learned to understand without translating. The tower speaks in subtle ways, expressing its age, its endurance, its steady place in the night's long breath. He lifts the lantern again, rising from the bench with slow, measured motion. The night folds around him as he walks back toward the door that leads inside. The metal handle is cool when his fingers close around it, and the hinges release their familiar murmur when he pushes the door open. Warmth flows out to greet him like an exhale from the heart of the tower. He steps inside. The stairwell receives him in a dim embrace, the lantern's glow brushing the stones as he begins to climb. The tower's inner air holds a deep stillness, thick with the scent of oil and salt, and the faint woody note of old beams. His steps echo faintly, but even the echoes seem softened, as though the walls themselves are tired and content. When he reaches the next landing, he feels the temperature rise slightly, the lingering warmth from the flame above. He pauses again at the small window facing the sea. The glass is cool beneath his fingertips, its surface misted from the fog outside. He wipes a small circle clear with the side of his thumb and peers through. The ocean below is a muted expanse of gray, its surface brushed by the faint shimmer of the lighthouse beam. Your boat is barely visible now, more impression than shape. The tide carries it gently, nudging it in slow arcs. For a moment, the keeper's gaze lingers there, not in concern, but in acknowledgement. Then he continues upward. The lantern room stands exactly as he left it. The flame burns clean and steady. The lens turns with its quiet, unwavering rhythm. He approaches the mechanism once more, checking its movement with a light touch. The brass feels warm beneath his fingers. The gears continue their rotation without strain, guided by the same small adjustments he has made countless times. Satisfied, he lets his hand fall away. The night outside deepens, and the fog thickens until the horizon vanishes completely. The keeper watches this quiet shift, the way the world fades into softness, leaving only the sound of the sea and the steady turning of the lens as anchors in the vast dark. He places the lantern on the floor beside him. Its glow pools gently, warming the wooden boards. He settles onto the narrow ledge, allowing the night to unfold. The lighthouse breathes, the sea breathes, and the keeper breathes with them, slowly, steadily, in a rhythm older than memory. The keeper lets his gaze soften as the light turns again, casting its muted sweep across the fog-thickened world. The glow brushes the glass with a pale shimmer, then slips across the sea and dissolves into the night. He watches the arc for several breaths, not counting the rotations, simply feeling the rhythm settle deeper into him, the way a lullaby settles into the bones. The wooden boards beneath him are warm from the lantern's presence. He rests one hand on the floor, feeling the faint vibration of the mechanism travel through the timber, a steady thrum like the heartbeat of something ancient and kind. The tower has always spoken in these subtle tones, never loud, never insistent, just a quiet reminder that it remains awake with him. After a long moment, he rises, lifting the lantern with a slow, easy motion. The flame wavers, then steadies, forming a small golden circle around him. He turns toward the stairs, the lantern's glow stretching ahead like a soft ribbon guiding him downward. As he descends, the air shifts from warm to cool again, brushing against his face with the gentle touch of stone that has held centuries of night. His footsteps echo faintly against the curved walls, but even the echoes feel softened as though cushioned by layers of silence. He moves without hurry, letting the tower's natural rhythm determine his pace. At the next landing, he pauses before the window. The fog outside has grown denser, clinging to the glass in soft patterns that resemble delicate frost. He leans close enough to feel the chill radiating through the pane. The sea beyond is no longer visible, only the suggestion of movement, the slow pulse of waves brushing the rocks far below. He places his palm flat on the window, and the contrast, his warmth against the glass's cold, sends a gentle shiver through him. For a moment, he stands perfectly still, letting the sensation sink fully into his skin, grounding him in the quiet. Then he continues downward. When he reaches the living quarters once more, the lantern's glow reveals the small comforts of the room. The blanket folded neatly on the bed, the soft gleam of the oil lamp, the faint outline of the journal resting on the table. He sets the lantern beside the lamp and lowers himself into the chair, which accepts his weight with a familiar creak. He takes the journal again, not to write, but simply to hold. The worn leather cover is smooth, softened by years of being opened and closed beneath lamplight. His thumb runs along its spine in small, absent strokes, and the motion begins to soothe the tiny remnants of wakefulness lingering in his mind. Outside, the lighthouse beam completes another rotation. The fog glows for a breath. Then the darkness returns, gentle and unbroken. He tilts his head, listening to the distant hum of the mechanism above, the soft sigh of the stove settling, the faint whisper of mist brushing the tower's outer walls. These are the sounds that carry him through the long hours, each one a thread woven into the tapestry of the night. After a while, he rises again, moving toward the bed. The blanket is cool to the touch when he lifts it, the fabric carrying the scent of clean cotton and the faint trace of sea air. He smooths it over the mattress, letting the folds fall naturally without force. He sits on the edge of the bed, fingers resting lightly on the blanket. His gaze drifts toward the window, where the fog presses against the glass like a slow tide, softening the last outlines of the world. The keeper allows his eyes to half close, feeling the heaviness of the night settle into his shoulders, his chest, his breath. The lighthouse continues its steady arc. The sea breathes in muted rhythm. The mist moves like a quiet thought drifting across the mind. He lies back slowly, letting the mattress cradle the weight of his body. The blanket settles over him in a gentle wave, and the pillow rises to meet the curve of his head. His breathing deepens, matching the slow, unbroken cadence of the tower around him. For a long moment, he simply rests, eyes closed, breath soft, surrounded by the quiet presence of the lighthouse and the sea intertwined. Then, with the faintest sigh, he allows himself to drift deeper into the night, carried by the calm pulse of the turning light. The keeper remains still beneath the blanket, his breath rising and falling in long, gentle waves. The tower around him settles into its own quiet posture, as though the stones themselves are easing deeper into the night. The faint hum of the turning lens above filters down through the walls in a steady, almost imperceptible rhythm, soft enough to disappear, yet present enough to feel like a distant heartbeat. His eyes remain closed, but the world does not vanish, it simply softens. Shadows blur, sounds stretch, time loosens its edges. Outside, the fog thickens further, pressing against the glass with the soft weight of drifting clouds. The sea responds in slow, muffled breaths, the rhythm so steady it might be mistaken for the tower's own exhale. Occasionally, the light sweeps across the mist, creating a pale glow that filters through the window in thin, ghost-like ribbons. The keeper shifts slightly, turning onto his side. The mattress dips gently beneath him, the fabric rustling like a distant whisper. He pulls the blanket closer, letting its warmth nestle against his chest. His fingers loosen, uncurling from the subtle tension of wakefulness. For a while, he rests in that half-dreaming state where thoughts drift like low clouds across the mind, soft, slow, without anchors. A memory of early morning gulls, the scent of warm bread from a day long gone, the feel of rope beneath weathered hands, the echo of laughter carried by a wind from another season. These impressions move through him with the ease of waves traveling across calm water. They do not ask to be held. They simply pass, leaving a faint warmth behind them. A gentle creak rolls through the wooden beam above, one of the tower's oldest voices, familiar and soothing. The keeper's breath deepens in response, sinking into a slower rhythm, the kind that marks the beginning of true rest. The lantern on the table flickers once, then steadies, as if matching his heartbeat. The turning lens sends another muted pulse of brightness into the fog, and for a brief moment, the room shifts with a delicate shimmer. The light does not wake him. It wraps around him like a thin veil, comforting in its predictability. He inhales softly. The scent of old timber, warm linen, and faint tea lingers in the air. It settles over him like a memory of home. Outside, the sea rolls against the rocks with a steady, lulling rhythm. Each wave rises, pauses, and releases, a pattern older than the tower, older than the keeper, older than the names that once belonged to these shores. The night hums with the quiet togetherness of sky, sea, and stone. The keeper's breathing slows further. His chest rises, falls, with the same cadence as the tide. Even the mist seems to move in harmony with him, drifting in slow spirals that curl gently around the tower's silhouette. The light above continues its vigil, turning and turning, a silent guardian keeping the night soft and navigable. The keeper's thoughts dim. What remains is only sensation, warmth, weight, breath, distant sound. A final sigh escapes him, long and quiet, as though he is surrendering the last threads of the waking world. The tower holds him in its gentle embrace. The sea cradles the stones beneath with its timeless rhythm, and the night wraps its vast, soft darkness around everything, sealing the moment into a deep, drifting calm. The keeper drifts in the soft cradle of the bed, the blanket rising and falling with each slow breath. The lantern light across the room dims with the deepening night, shrinking into a faint amber glow that trembles gently at the edges. Shadows gather in quiet folds along the walls, softened by fog and the muted sweep of the rotating beam above. The tower's hum continues, low, steady, patient, a sound that does not intrude but accompanies, a sound shaped by stone, metal, and the long memory of the sea. The keeper's breathing falls so deeply into the rhythm of the lighthouse that it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. His body grows heavier, sinking into the mattress as if the night itself were pressing its cool palm against his shoulders, encouraging him to let go. A distant wave breaks softly against the rocks. A pulse of light sweeps the fog. The wind brushes the tower with a slow, fleeting touch. He shifts again, only slightly, his head sinking deeper into the pillow. The fabric conforms to him, gentle and warm, gathering the shape of someone who has lived within these walls for many unbroken seasons. His hands lie still at his sides, palms open, fingers relaxed. In the quiet, small details emerge like drifting sparks, the faint tick of cooling metal from the stove, the muted crackle of the lantern wick adjusting itself, the whisper of fog sliding across the window pane, the soft vibration of the lens turning far above. None of these ask for attention. They simply exist like distant companions breathing in the same room. His thoughts, what little remain, thin out even further, dissolving into fragments. The taste of tea lingering faintly on his tongue, the memory of a warm morning sun from weeks ago, the sensation of wool on his hands as he mended a rope, the echo of a bird calling at dawn on a calm spring day. These drift through the edges of his half-dreaming mind, slow and weightless, slipping past without form or urgency. Outside, the fog has grown so thick it turns the lighthouse beam into a muted halo, a glowing presence rather than a defined arc. The light pushes through the mist in soft pulses, illuminating the air with a pale shimmer before fading back into velvet gray. The rhythm never wavers. Far below, the tide shifts, pulling back with a quiet, rhythmic suction. The sea's breath becomes longer, slower, mirroring the keeper's own body as he settles into deeper rest. His breathing now is the softest gesture in the room, barely a rise, barely a fall, a sound almost indistinguishable from the hush of distant waves. The tower, as though sensing his surrender to the night, grows even stiller. The stones hold their warmth. The wood keeps its hush. The mechanism above spins in its patient, unbroken path. The keeper drifts further, not into sleep alone, but into a deeper quiet, the kind found only in places shaped by years of gentle vigilance. The fog presses closer, the light turns, the sea hums lightly against the rocks, and the night, soft, ancient, endless, wraps them all into the same slow heartbeat. The night continues its slow drift around the tower, settling into the quiet the keeper has shaped through years of gentle vigilance. His breathing remains soft, a nearly silent rise and fall beneath the blanket. The lantern's glow dims further as the flame shrinks, becoming a small amber ember that pulses faintly with each draft that slips through the stone. The tower hums above him, steady and unchanged, its old bones holding the warmth of the day deep within the walls. The rhythm of the turning lens, a low, resonant sway, moves through the stones and into the room in soft waves, like a lullaby carried through a long corridor. Outside, the fog closes in. It drifts against the glass with the slow insistence of a tide returning to shore, each layer thicker and gentler than the last. The window pane cools under its touch, forming tiny beads that cling to the surface and sparkle in the faint residual glow of the lantern. For a moment, the light above completes another rotation. A muted bloom of pale brightness reaches the window. It dissolves almost instantly into the fog, leaving only a memory of silvered air. Inside, the keeper shifts barely at all, just a faint movement beneath the blanket, the kind that comes when the body surrenders another layer of tension. His foot slides a little deeper into the warmth at the lower edge of the bed. His hand relaxes fully against the sheet, fingers uncurling in slow abandon. The sounds that fill the room are not even sounds, merely textures, the hush of the fog brushing stone, the softened thrum of the lens turning above, the distant velvet muted strike of waves against rock. The faintest crackle from the dying lantern flame, all blend into one long, unbroken exhale. He drifts, not toward wakefulness, not toward any thought, but toward a place where the rhythms of the tower replace the rhythms of his mind. His breath merges into the space, his body sinks into the quiet that holds him. The fog outside thickens further still until it becomes a kind of cocoon around the lighthouse. The world beyond disappears completely, erased into soft gray. Even the sea becomes only a suggestion, a murmured presence woven through the air like a memory of motion. The keeper's breathing grows slower, deeper, softer. The tower seems to answer in kind, the lens moving with the unchanging patience of something that has watched over countless nights. Its heartbeat pulses through the walls in long, warm waves. A gentle creak issues from the beam overhead, an old familiar sound, softened by time. It is the sound of wood relaxing into the deeper hours, settling into its own rest. The keeper doesn't stir. His thoughts have thinned into threads, then into wisps, then into nothing at all. Only the faint warmth of the blanket, the soft pressure of the mattress beneath him, and the muted heartbeat of the lighthouse remain. Outside, the sea exhales. Inside, the light hums. The fog folds in, gentle and embracing, and the night continues, slow and endless, carrying the keeper deeper into its quiet. The fog moves in closer still, gathering itself around the lighthouse until the tower feels suspended in a world made only of breath and drifting silver. The beam, once wide and far-reaching, now glows only a few meters beyond the glass before softening into a pale velvety blur. Each sweep is slower than the last, not in truth, but in how the night receives it, stretching the movement into something long and weightless. Inside the quarters, the keeper's breath falls into that same elongated cadence. In, a soft swelling of the blanket. Out, a warm, quiet release into the dim air. The lantern by the wall finally gives in. Its flame flickers once, twice, then folds into itself and goes out. A thin thread of smoke coils upward, barely visible in the darkness, carrying the faint scent of warmed oil before disappearing into the stillness. The room settles deeper into shadow, but nothing sharp emerges, only gentler shapes, softened by the faint glow that filters down the stairwell from the turning lens above. The keeper remains completely unmoving now. His presence blends into the quiet, almost indistinguishable from the bed, the blankets, the slow pulse of the lighthouse. His thoughts have dissolved entirely, replaced by a drifting sense of weight, then by a drifting sense of nothing at all. The night breathes through the walls. Fog curls through the cracks in slow, ghost-like ribbons. Waves touch the rocks with the patience of an old ritual. The tower hums, deep, gentle, warm. The hum resonates through the wooden beams, into the blankets, into the keeper's bones, until he and the tower seem to share the same quiet pulse. Above, the lens turns, a soft vibration, a small shifting of light, a whisper of brightness through fog, thick as wool. Below, the sea murmurs low, a breath drawn, a breath released, a hush that matches the keeper's own. Even the mist seems to slow its movement, folding around the lighthouse in long, drifting drapes, as though cushioning the structure in a cradle made of silence. A faint creak rolls through the stones, slow, old, harmless. Another whisper of wind brushes the window. A tiny droplet slides down the glass, its path illuminated for a single moment by the passing light. The keeper does not notice. He drifts deeper and deeper into the soft center of the night. The world narrows to warmth and darkness, to the gentle pressure of the mattress, to the cool whisper of fog against stone, to the faraway pulse of light turning above him. Nothing disturbs the quiet, nothing rises, nothing falls out of place. There is only this, a lighthouse breathing, a sea humming, a man held safely in the vast, dark hush. The fog outside thickens until it seems almost solid, a soft wall of gray that holds the lighthouse in a cocoon of breath and mist. The beam above continues its patient orbit, but its reach is now muted, confined to a small sphere of trembling brightness that barely escapes the lantern room glass. Each revolution glows, softens, fades, dissolves, and the night accepts it without resistance. Inside, the keeper lies completely still, absorbed into the gentle hush. His breathing is now so slow it almost disappears into the folds of the blanket, rising only enough to move the fabric by a whisper. Every muscle has surrendered to the weight of the bed, to the warmth resting along his spine, to the calm that sits deep in the marrow of the night. The faint hum of the lens turning above has settled into the air like a soft vibration, steady and warm. It travels down the inner stones of the tower, brushing the edges of the room with a subtle resonance that feels more like comfort than sound. The keeper's eyelids remain closed, unmoving. His face is peaceful, lined gently by years, but softened now by the absolute stillness that only arrives in the deepest hours. A small shift occurs in the tower, a long, slow creak along one of the beams, not sharp or sudden, but stretched and harmless, like wood stretching after a long rest. The fog presses against the window. The sea rolls in a nearly silent rhythm. The night folds itself over the lighthouse like a blanket drawn higher. The keeper drifts even further. A warmth settles along his chest where the blanket rests. His hand lies open on the mattress, fingers slack, palm relaxed. His breathing merges into the quiet so completely that it feels like part of the tower's own exhale. Outside, the sea continues its ancient motion. Each wave rises with heavy calm, leans into the rocks, and withdraws with a long, contented sigh. The sound is steady, dependable, older than memory. It hums through the fog, through the stones, through the bed itself. Another soft beam of light sweeps past the glass. It glows faintly through the mist, reaching only far enough to cast a pale shimmer across the room before dissolving. The shimmer glides across the wall, the blanket, the floor, then disappears again as the lens continues its circle. The keeper remains undisturbed, not awake, not dreaming, just drifting in that deep, weightless place where the world feels far away and the night feels like a gentle ocean holding him afloat. Every sound grows rounder, every shadow grows softer, every breath grows longer. The lighthouse, the sea, the fog, and the man all share the same slow, ancient heartbeat. Nothing changes, nothing interrupts, nothing rises from the quiet. There is only the steady calm of a life lived close to the night, and the night, in return, holding that life gently in both hands. The night holds the lighthouse in a cradle of thick, breath-like fog. The world outside has faded into a soft, seamless gray, leaving only the muted glow of the turning lens to draw slow, dissolving lines through the mist. Each rotation is quieter than the last, not in sound, but in feeling, its presence becoming more like a memory than emotion. Inside the keeper's quarters, the quiet has deepened into something almost tangible, a soft weight, a gentle hush, a slow pulse folded through the air. The keeper remains stretched beneath the blanket, his breath moving in the faintest rise and fall. The warmth that gathers around him feels anchored to the bed frame, to the stones beneath, to the tower's slow heartbeat above. It is a warmth that does not insist, it simply holds. The pillow beneath him has softened under the long pressure of the night. It shapes to his head, to the lines of his cheek, to the quiet surrender of a body letting go. His hand rests loosely near the edge of the blanket, fingers relaxed into a gentle curve, unmoving. A faint vibration continues to travel down through the tower, the hum of the rotating lens blending with the fog's slow exhale outside. The stones around him have absorbed the sound until it feels less like a noise and more like the echo of a distant tide. The fog brushes softly against the glass. The sea murmurs below. The tower breathes in its slow, ancient rhythm. The keeper drifts. Thought does not rise. Memory does not intrude. Only warm darkness and the soft embrace of night remain. Somewhere above, the beam glides across the lantern room, touching the thick mist with a muted glimmer before fading back into shadow. A faint trace of that glow filters downward through the stairwell, not bright enough to form shapes, just enough to add a delicate sheen to the edges of the room. The keeper's breath deepens another fraction. The blanket rises, pauses, settles. The night folds around the lighthouse in a quiet cocoon, layering fog over stone, stone over silence, silence over breath. The sea withdraws with a soft sigh, leaving small trails of foam that cling briefly to the rocks before dissolving. The tide shifts again, slow, gentle, patient, returning with a muted hush that echoes faintly through the tower's lower stones. In the keeper's quarters, the darkness feels warm, like a quiet room filled with the lingering heat of a long-forgotten fire. The air carries a subtle scent of salt and linen and old wood softened by time. The lantern, extinguished earlier, stands in its place like a silent companion. Its glass still holds a faint warmth from the flame that once danced inside. The wick rests untouched, curled in on itself like a small sleeping creature. The keeper remains unmoved. At the edges of the night, small sounds appear and drift away again. A soft crack as the wood of the table adjusts to temperature. A gentle clink as the stove's inner metal cools another degree. A nearly inaudible flutter of fog against the window pane. A slow, distant surge of waves rolling through the mist. None of these disturb him. They pass like thin clouds across a moonless sky, present but weightless. The tower continues its vigil. The lens turns, the stones breathe, the sea hums, the night thickens. The keeper sinks deeper. There is no separation now between man and lighthouse, between breath and tide, between rest and quiet movement. He lies wrapped in the same softness that presses gently against the tower's outer walls, drifted into the same rhythm carried by the turning beam above him. Slowly, softly, the night folds even further into itself. Nothing asks to be remembered. Nothing asks to be done. There is only the deep, still presence of the sea's dark hush, and the keeper, held safely within it, drifts deeper into the vast, warm quiet. The night holds its depth with unwavering gentleness, drawing itself closer around the lighthouse until even the air feels padded, thick and softened by layers of fog. The beam above continues its slow, unbroken rotation, steady, patient, unfaltering, though the mist absorbs most of its reach. Only the faintest shimmer escapes the glass, slipping into the gray like a small heartbeat dissolving into sleep. Inside the quarters, the keeper remains still beneath the blanket, drifting in a place where neither waking nor dreaming has definition. His breath rises in long, even intervals, each exhale melting into the quiet like a thread woven seamlessly into the fabric of night. The mattress holds his shape with a comforting familiarity, its surface warmed by hours of rest. The blanket lies smoothly over him, molded gently to the curve of his shoulder, the slope of his ribs, the quiet fall of his arms. Everything about the space seems to settle around his presence. Soft shadows, softened air, softened time. The lighthouse hum continues its low, resonant murmur. It moves through the stones, through the floorboards, through the keeper's chest, until all of it becomes one continuous rhythm. A subtle shift in the wind nudges the fog against the window pane, creating a faint tap, barely audible, more a texture than a sound. The glass cools further, and a thin sheen of moisture spreads across it. Droplets gather and slide in slow, irregular trails, catching the stray glimmer of the rotating light for just a heartbeat before dissolving into darkness once more. The keeper does not stir. The night deepens. Somewhere below, the tide pulls itself outward again, drawing long ribbons of water through the narrow cracks between the rocks. The sound is muted by distance and fog, turning into a low, velvety hush. Occasionally, a more deliberate wave folds over itself, rolling with the weight of far-off currents, but even that movement feels softened, as though wrapped in thick cloth. Inside, the air rests still and dense. The darkness no longer feels like absence. It feels like warmth. The keeper's face is peaceful in the dim. The faint lines etched by years of weather, salt, wind, and solitude have eased, releasing the tightness that daylight sometimes leaves behind. His eyelids rest softly. His lips part only enough to shape the quiet breath that leaves him. His body settles deeper into the cradle of the blankets. A soft creak comes from the wooden post near the foot of the bed. Not loud, not sudden. Just the tower reassuring itself of its own balance. The keeper's breathing aligns with it, unknowingly matching the rhythm. The scent of the room has shifted too, less of warm tea now, more of old wood breathing out the remnants of the day. The stove has cooled fully, the metal settling with tiny, delicate clicks that fade almost immediately into silence. Above, the lens completes another rotation, and another, and another. Each pass feels slower only because the night stretches around it, elongating the moments between brightness and dimness. The cycle becomes an anchor, not of light, but of gentle certainty. The keeper remains drifting. Thought does not rise, not even as a faint ripple. Only sensation remains, the warmth of the blanket, the softness of the pillow, the slow lull of the sea pressing itself into the stones below. Fog thickens outside, so dense now it seems to almost press inward, wrapping the lighthouse in a soft, muted cocoon. The world beyond becomes featureless, depthless, timeless. Inside, the keeper is safe, still, held. His breath slows again, then steadies, then rests at the same pace as the sea's long rhythmic sigh. If any sound rises, a distant gull turning in sleep on a hidden rock, the faint drop of condensed mist from the balcony rail above, it passes like a small pebble, sinking into deep water without ripples. The lighthouse stands anchored in its solitude. The beam turns its patient arc. The sea breathes its ancient lullaby, and the keeper drifts on, deeper into the vast, soft quiet. The night settles even further around the lighthouse, tightening its soft, velvety cocoon until every movement beyond the walls dissolves into indistinct murmurs. The fog clings so thickly to the stone that the tower seems suspended in a world made only of breath, slow, drifting, weightless. Above, the beam of the lantern room continues its silent rotations, each sweep meeting only a few feet of visibility before sinking into muted gray. The fog absorbs the light like cloth absorbing warmth, leaving behind only a diffused shimmer that lingers for a heartbeat before fading completely. Inside the keeper's quarters, the quiet has deepened into something almost tender. The blanket rests heavily across his frame, its weight gentle and grounding, holding him in the center of the night. His breathing has fallen into the slowest rhythm yet, so soft it barely stirs the air around him. Each inhale gathers the faint scent of old wood and sea salt linen. Each exhale blends into the darkness without a sound. The mattress beneath him cradles the curves of his shoulders and back, shaped to years of resting in this same small space. It holds him with a familiarity that feels almost alive, as though the bed itself is participating in the night's long, quiet vigil. A faint vibration continues to hum through the floorboards. Not loud, not noticeable even, unless one has lived here long enough to feel the tower's pulse beneath every moment. It is the old rhythm of the turning lens above, a resonance that threads through the stairs, the stone, the very air. The keeper's breath aligns with it effortlessly, falling into perfect synchrony. Outside, droplets of dew form on the railing and the windows. They cling there like tiny beads of glass, faintly catching the beam's blurred glow when it passes. Some slide downward in slow, languid trails. Others stay suspended, unmoving. The sea beneath the cliff shifts in broad, unhurried motions. Its voice is distant now, just a soft, rounded murmur, shaped by the thickness of the fog and the depth of the night. The keeper does not stir. He is drifting so deeply that even the subtle shifts of the tower go unnoticed. A gentle sigh escapes the wooden frame of the bed as temperature cools further. The sound folds into the room like a quiet whisper. The keeper's fingers relax another fraction, opening loosely against the sheet. Minutes pass, or perhaps hours. The night hides the distinction. The fog presses closer. The beam completes another circle. The keeper breathes in, slow, breathes out, slower still. His thoughts have thinned into nothingness. Only sensation remains. The softness of the blanket, the faint warmth at his chest, the cool edge of the pillow touching his cheek, the steady hum of the lens above him, the deep, low exhale of the sea. The lighthouse stands unmoving, a guardian wrapped in fog. The night, vast and gentle, holds everything in its quiet palms. And the keeper drifts on, lower, deeper, calmer, into a darkness that feels warm and endless. The night presses in with a deeper serenity, folding around the lighthouse until the world feels reduced to nothing but breath, warmth, and the steady hush of the sea far below. The fog thickens into slow-moving layers, drifting along the outer walls with the gentleness of a tide brushing against soft sand. Every sound is wrapped in this mist, softened until even the smallest echo feels distant, almost imagined. Inside the keeper's room, the quiet is absolute. The blanket rises faintly with each inhale, sinks softly with each exhale, forming a barely perceptible rhythm beneath the dimming traces of light that slip through the doorway. His body lies fully surrendered to rest, the weight of his limbs settling into the mattress as though the bed were slowly absorbing him into its warmth. His breath is almost indistinguishable from the room's stillness. A soft inhale, warm, steady. A softer exhale, barely shaping the air. The pillow beneath him has become an extension of the quiet, holding the contours of his face with gentle persistence. The faint scent of linen mixes with the coolness that settles through the stones as the deeper hours arrive. Above, the tower continues its slow vigil. The lens rotates, a sound so subtle it feels like part of the darkness itself. A low hum, a faint shift, a pulse of brightness rising and falling. Each sweep of light reaches the fog with softened edges, illuminating the mist in pale, muted halos. The glow filters downward through the stairwell in thin layers, brushing the floorboards with a shimmer that lasts only a second before dissolving again. The keeper doesn't notice. His thoughts have dissolved completely into the warm dark. No memories pull him upward. No worries drift close enough to form shape. Only the deep, steady quiet remains. Another small sound surfaces, a slow settling of the timber beam near the window. A gentle crack, long and stretched, hardly more than a sigh. The fog outside presses against the glass, and a thin trickle of moisture trails downward in a slow curve. The sea, though distant and wrapped in heavy mist, sends its voice upward, a soft roll, a slow fold, a muted breath against the rocks. It rises and falls with the same cadence as the keeper's breath, merging into a single continuous lull. The night grows heavier, but not oppressive, only deeper, like layers of soft fabric settling over everything. The temperature drops by a degree, and the air carries the clean, cool scent of moisture trapped in fog. The keeper's hand relaxes again, shifting only enough for the fingers to uncurl fully. His arm lies motionless, cradled by the blanket's warmth. His entire body seems to float just above full sleep, drifting in a peaceful, weightless suspension. The glow from the turning lens dims further through the fog, becoming more memory than light. The lighthouse breathes with a quiet, ancient patience, its rhythm steady, its presence grounding. Outside, the world has dissolved into drifting gray, no horizon, no sea line, only layers of mist moving in slow, gentle tides. Inside, warm darkness embraces the keeper entirely. The night does not deepen further, it simply holds, steady and vast. The tower stands unwavering, the sea murmurs below, the fog folds in, and the keeper drifts, untouched by anything except the softness that surrounds him. The fog lies heavy against the lighthouse now, a vast, breathing cloud that moves in slow tides around the stone. The night no longer has edges. It has settled into one unbroken softness, a gentle darkness that wraps the tower like a warm, endless lull. Each rotation of the lens creates only a faint suggestion of light, a ripple of softness that glows through the mist before dissolving again into the hush. The keeper lies quietly beneath the blanket, his breath falling into the same slow rhythm the sea carries below. His chest rises just enough to shift a fold of fabric. His exhale drifts into the room like a faint, warm thread that vanishes almost before it forms. The weight of sleep holds him steadily, the kind of sleep that belongs not to a single night, but to a lifetime of gentle, familiar rituals. The tower hums above him, deep, steady, unchanging, a sound shaped by turning glass, warm metal, and the patience of old stone. The fog outside moves like a second blanket over the world. It presses softly against the window pane, blurring every shape, smoothing every thought, erasing every distance. The sea brushes the rocks far below in long, rounded strokes, its voice lowered by the thickness of the mist. Each wave sounds like a breath drawn slowly through dark water, then released with calm, deliberate ease. The tide matches the keeper's breathing perfectly, as though the ocean itself has settled into rest. Light moves again, a soft sweep, a dim shimmer, just enough to trace a pale arc across the room. It touches the edge of the bed, the folds of the blanket, the quiet outline of the keeper's resting silhouette. Then fades, leaving behind a gentle memory of warmth. No thought rises in his mind now. No sound calls him back. Even the patterns of the day have dissolved completely into the deep, warm dark. The lighthouse stands watch for him. The sea sings for him. The fog holds him. The night keeps him. Everything slows. Everything softens. Everything drifts. And as the hours stretch onward, the keeper seems to melt into the quiet around him, becoming part of the tower's breath, part of the sea's murmur, part of the endless, patient calm rolling through the fog-bound world. Nothing stirs, nothing presses forward, nothing asks to be remembered. there is only this: the hush of stone, the warmth of blankets, the slow turn of light, the steady heartbeat of the ocean, and a solitude so gentle it feels like sleep woven into the air. The night fades deeper, and the world follows it, quietly, slowly, beautifully, into rest.